Boy, oh boy, do we have a treat today. We are living through a momentous occasion as we learn more about the Hebrew Bible manuscripts that were discovered near the Dead Sea last Tuesday. This is the Faithless Father channel. Thanks for coming. And here we talk about religious topics and philosophical topics. Make sure to subscribe if you're interested in that type of thing. On March 16th, the Israel Antiquities Authority announced the find. The New York Times did a great piece on this entitled, "Israel Reveals Newly Discovered Fragments of Dead Sea Scrolls." And this is from the article. The finds, ranging from just a few millimeters to a thumbnail in size, so these things aren't actual entire scrolls. They're very old, and there are very few Bible manuscripts. Well, actually, let's see. In the New Testament, there are no manuscripts whatsoever from the first century in the New Testament. I'd have to actually look to the Dead Sea Scrolls in their first find in the 1940s. I'm not too familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Hebrew Bible manuscripts that we found up to this point. But it's very rare that we find entire pieces of paper that old. So as this article says, they found basically pieces of these manuscripts. And they are the first to be unearthed in archaeological excavations in the Judean desert in about 60 years. Israeli researchers unveiled on Tuesday dozens of newly discovered Dead Sea Scroll fragments containing biblical texts dating back nearly 2,000 years, adding to the body of artifacts that have shed light on the history of Judaism, early Christian life, and ancient humankind. The parchment fragments, ranging from just a few millimeters to a thumbnail in size, are the first in about 60 years to have been unearthed in archaeological excavations in the Judean desert. They were found as part of a 4-year Israeli national project to prevent further looting of antiquities from the remote caves and crevices of the desert east and southeast of Jerusalem, which straddles the boundary of Israel and the occupied West Bank. So if you're interested in exactly where these fragments were found, where a lot of these fragments were found, they were found in the Cave of Horrors, and here are the coordinates right here. It's not too clear if you look on Google Maps, but here we are southeast of Jerusalem, and the Dead Sea is right here. Qumran is up here. A lot of the first find of the Dead Sea Scrolls were found up here in Qumran. I guess they made a national park, duly so. And then we go south of that, and then here is the Cave of Horrors. Not too far from the Dead Sea, and there's the coordinates right there for you. Apparently there's a cave nearby called the Cave of Letters. The project turned up many other rare and historic finds, including a large woven basket with a lid that has been dated to approximately 10,500 years ago and may be the oldest such intact basket in the world. The archaeologists also found a 6,000-year-old, partially mummified skeleton of a child buried in the fetal position and wrapped in a cloth. Quote, and this is all from the New York Times article. The desert team, I'll link it in the description. The desert team showed exceptional courage, dedication, and devotion to purpose, rappelling down to caves located between heaven and earth, unquote, said Israel Hassan, the departing director of the Israel Antiquities Authority, which is the custodian of some 15,000 fragments of the scrolls. He added in a statement that their work in the caves involved, quote, digging and sifting through them, enduring thick and suffocating dust, and returning with gifts of immeasurable worth for mankind, unquote. The Dead Sea Scrolls, mostly discovered during the last century, contain the earliest known copies of almost every book of the Hebrew Bible, other than the book of Esther, written on parchment and papyrus. Dating from about the 3rd century BC to the 1st century AD, The biblical and apocryphal texts are widely considered to be among the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century and remain the subject of heated academic debate around the world. The arid conditions of the Judean desert provide a unique environment for the natural preservation of artifacts and organic materials that would ordinarily not have withstood the test of time. The latest fragments come from a scroll that was first discovered in the so-called Cave of Horror, in the so-called Horror Cave, is how the New York Times positions that, south of En Gedi in Israeli territory. Written in Greek by two scribes, it dates from the period of the Bar Kokhba revolt, almost 1,900 years ago, when Jewish rebels fled with their families and hid from the Romans in the caves. The Romans discovered and besieged the refugees in the Horror Cave until they starved to death. The first archaeologists to arrive in the last century found their skulls and bones placed in baskets in the cavern. The new fragments contain verses from Zechariah chapter 8, verses 16 through 17, including part of the name of God written in ancient Hebrew, the Tetragrammaton, and verses from Nahum chapter 1, verses 5 through 6, both from the biblical book of the 12 minor prophets. Experts managed to reconstruct 11 lines of the text from Zechariah, including the verses, quote, "These are the things you are to do. Speak the truth to one another, render true and perfect justice in your gates, and do not contrive evil against one another. And do not love perjury, because all those are things that I hate, declares the Lord." Oren Abelman, a member of the Antiquities Authority team who conserved and studied the new fragments, described the artifacts as, quote, "another small piece of the puzzle of the past," unquote. Speaking in the laboratories of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, where the fragments were displayed for reporters on Tuesday morning, he said the concept of equal justice for all was laid out in these verses that, quote, "are read by people and are meaningful to people to this very day," unquote. A Bedouin shepherd came across the first of the ancient scrolls in 1947. He found them stored in jars in a cave in Qumran, near the northern tip of the Dead Sea. Some were sold to a monastery and others to an antiques dealer in Bethlehem. Once their authenticity had been established, archaeological expeditions and antiquity robbers followed and emptied the caves of whatever they could find. But decades later, the Judean desert still had more secrets to give up. Amid signs that robbers were still seeking and hawking artifacts from the area, parts of which are difficult to reach and govern, the Israeli Authority decided to carry out a methodical, comprehensive survey of the cliffs, gorges, and caves beginning in 2017. Quote, "The archaeologists always used to chase after the robbers," unquote, said Amir Ganer, who leads the Antiquities Authority's theft prevention unit. Quote, "We decided it was perhaps time to get ahead of the robbers," unquote. Aided by modern tools such as drones that could search every nook and cranny, 3 teams made up of 4 people each mapped and scoured about 50 miles of cliff face running the length of the Dead Sea. Access to some caves would have been easier in ancient times. People knew how to navigate the animal paths, Mr. Gowner said, and instead of rappelling, they would have used rope ladders for remote caverns. But over 2,000 years, parts of the terrain have collapsed, creating deep chasms. The West Bank was under Jordanian control from 1948 until Israel captured the area in the 1967 Middle East War. It is now divided between Israeli and partial Palestinian control. But the 1967 boundary did not exist in antiquity, Mr. Ganner said, and the archaeologists treated the Judean desert as one unit for the purposes of the survey. In the Murabba'at caves, in what is now the West Bank, the archaeologists turned up a trove of artifacts. That included the basket and a cache of rare coins from the days of the Bar Kokhba revolt, minted with Jewish symbols such as harps and date palms. The basket looks not unlike one that could be bought at a home furnishing store today, but it dates to the pre-pottery Neolithic period. It was found buried in the ground. Quote, "We were very curious to see what was inside when we opened the lid," unquote, said Nama Sukinik, the Antiquities Authority's curator of organic materials. But it turned out to be empty, save for a bit of sand. That'd be kind of a bummer. You're digging and you find a basket and there's nothing inside. That would kind of be a bummer. The archaeological survey also revealed arrows and spearheads, scraps of fabric dyed with colorful stripes, fashionable for tunics in Roman times, seeds, olive and date pits, remnants of sandals, and a wooden lice comb, similar to one that might be used today, whose fine teeth had captured a small louse. That's interesting.
Have they been carbon dated?
No.
We have not carbon dated yet.
Please go ahead.
We're here where we discovered for the first time in over 50 years new fragments of biblical texts for the Dead Sea region. We found one fragment with from the book of Zechariah.
A basket and the scrolls were both found during a very big project led by IAEA to survey all the caves in the Judean desert. After a lot of years of that looters are coming in the caves to loot all the amazing stuff, coins, basketaries, clothes.
I'd also like to read a little bit of the Haaretz newspaper article that they came out with here in digital format as well. This is a Israeli newspaper, a very renowned and established one. It is titled, "Israel Finds New Dead Sea Scrolls, First Such Discovery in 60 Years." Written mainly in Greek, newly unveiled Dead Sea Scroll fragments contain parts of the Book of the 12 Minor Prophets. Massive survey of Israel's Judean desert caves also discovered body of mummified child wrapped in a 6,000-year-old blanket. New fragments of the Dead Sea Scroll have been discovered during an exhaustive survey of every nook, hole, and cranny in the Judean desert, the Israel Antiquities Authority revealed on Tuesday. It is the first new scroll to have been discovered in about 60 years. Written primarily in Greek, the newly unveiled scroll contains portions of the Book of the 12 Minor Prophets, including Zechariah and Nahum, the IAA said. It is likely that the new discovery is a missing part of a Minor Prophets scroll discovered in 1952, which includes Micah's prophecy about the end of days and the rise of a ruler out of Bethlehem. Another particularly exciting discovery in the course of the survey was something completely different, what may be the oldest surviving basket in the world. Made of woven reeds, the basket, complete with lid no less, is more than 10,500 years old, based on radiocarbon dating by Professor Elisabetta Boareto of the Weizmann Institute of Science in Revolt, the IAA said. That is the Neolithic period, predating the arrival of pottery in the region. Pottery did arise in Eastern Asia well beforehand. Like the much later scrolls, the basket survived all these years because of the remarkable heat and aridity in its location, the Murabaat caves in the Nahal Darga Reserve. Moreover, it was big with a capacity of around 90 to 100 liters, which suggested to the archaeologists that perhaps it was used for storage, especially as it had been placed in a pit dug into the floor of the Neolithic period cave. That, in and of itself, suggests that it was used for storage by the nomadic peoples inhabiting the area over 10,000 years ago, for the times they visited the cave, the archaeologists say. However, no remains have been found inside the basket as of writing that could indicate what it might have been used to store. The basket was found by teenagers with the Nofe Prat Pre-Military Academy, the IAA said. The Israel Antiquities Authority. The surveyors also found the naturally mummified remains of a child, likely a girl, wrapped in cloth, as though a blanket had been lovingly laid over him or her, they said. Complete with hair, the body was dated to around 6,000 years ago, predating the scrolls by some 4 millennia. The child, curled up in a fetal position, was apparently aged 6 to 12 based on a preliminary scan by Dr. Haila May of Tel Aviv University. In addition, the archaeologists found a cache of coins from the days of the ill-fated Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans in 133 to 135 CE. The coins bear the typical Jewish symbols of the time, such as a harp and a date palm. Working in 3 teams under IAA officials, Uriah Amikai, Hege Hammer, and Haim Cohen, the searchers also discovered arrow and spear tips, woven fabric, sandals, and even lice combs from the time of the revolt. The Dead Sea Scrolls were written from about the 3rd or 2nd century BCE to the 1st century CE, though by whom is not known. Only a few of the approximately 900 found are, yet study of the scrolls has been possible. The rest are damaged and fragmented, yet study of the scrolls has been possible, including thanks to painstaking restoration. We now know they contain the earliest known versions of many biblical texts, religious apocrypha, commentaries, and mystical manuscripts. Lending credence to the theory that the scrolls weren't written by a single people, some are in Hebrew, some Aramaic, and some in Greek. The newest scroll to be found, or rather the fragments thereof, is in Greek, said the IAA. Perhaps ironically, from our postmodern perspective, given that the scroll sect, the enigmatic authors of at least some of the scrolls, harbored a sense of righteousness versus the evil of the world and harbored apocalyptic visions. Among the newly found fragments is a hallmark dovish sentence from the book of Zechariah. Quote, "These are the things you are to do. Speak the truth to one another, render true and perfect justice in your gates, and do not contrive evil against one another, and do not love perjury, because all those are things that I hate, declares the Lord." Unquote. In another irony, the scroll with these verses was found in the so-called Cave of Horrors, the IAA revealed. It's called that because when it was first excavated in the 1950s, archaeologists found the skeletons of 40 men, women, and children who had sought refuge there during the Bar Kokhba revolt. Remains of a Roman encampment were found atop the cliff on which the cave is located. The lack of signs of violence on the skeletons led archaeologists to suggest the Romans simply besieged the cave until the rebels inside succumbed to thirst or starvation. It makes sense that the Romans didn't bother to storm the cave because to access it, one must rappel down some 80 meters from the cliff top. The IAA begs to bring to everybody's attention that going there is in fact prohibited, period, lest one fall to one's death in the desert gorges below. So there you have it. First, I read from the New York Times article entitled "Israel Reveals Newly Discovered Fragments of Dead Sea Scrolls," and that second article from the Haaretz agency in Israel entitled "Israel Finds New Dead Sea Scrolls, First Such Discovery in 60 Years." And I'll link those two down below. A couple things that I remember from reading about this new discovery is that it is interesting in these particular fragments, we see that the name of the Jewish God, Yahweh, is still in the Hebrew. Since most of the text is in Greek and the manuscripts are in Greek, but they kept the tetragrammaton in Hebrew, which is of note. And also, there is a textual variant in that verse, which I quoted, which was quoted in both of these articles. Here it is again, the quote of the verse in Zechariah. "These are the things you are to do. Speak the truth to one another, render true and perfect justice in your gates." And I believe that is a textual variant was found in this Greek rendition of the Hebrew text. and the variation includes, instead of gates, streets, which is interesting. Obviously not anything earth-shattering, but still a textual variant in the manuscript, which is always interesting. It's always interesting to delve into the probabilities of what perhaps mirrored the original autographs more so than the other text. And I'm sure more information is going to come out on this, and we will learn more and more about each of these fragments found. And I'll let you guys know where we can read the manuscripts themselves when they are photographed and cataloged, which I'm sure they will be. And so you can make sure to subscribe and watch my future videos if you'd like to be notified when that occurs, and I can help you out with that. So really, really cool stuff. These ancient artifacts are really something. It teaches us where we came from, teaches us more about our human story, and causes great reflection on our origins and our destiny. And thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you like what you heard, and we will see you next time.